Good evening, and welcome to the Parks and Natural Resources Commission for Monday, June 3rd, 2013. First thing on the agenda is approval of the agenda. Any changes from staff or commissioners? We need a motion to approve then?
Second.
Second? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
The agenda is approved. Second is an opportunity for citizens to approach the commission on an item that is not on the agenda. Anybody wishing to approach the commission tonight? Seeing none, moving on to approval of the minutes from our last meeting. Any changes from staff or commissioners? Seeing none, we need a motion to approve.
So moved.
Second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Okay, next item. Review a wetland permit and replacement plan for the construction of a stormwater pond located northwest of North Twin Lake. Presenter tonight.
Thank you. My name is Daryl Jacobson. I'm the Water Resource Specialist here at the city. I've got the first three items here on the agenda, so I'll settle in here. The first one is the North Twin Lake Stormwater Pond and Wetland Replacement Plan. The city is looking to install a new stormwater pond in this location. You can see here on the edge of North Twin Lake. You can see there's a little channel there where stormwater is currently coming in, and that is coming in from the County Road 4235 area. A lot of folks kind of call it the Golden Triangle area of Burnsville, and that stormwater is currently untreated heading into North Twin Lake. This project was identified in a lake management plan that was done for both North and South Twin Lake, as well as Early Lake back in late 2007. The stormwater from these two lakes drains to Early Lake, and so that's why the three lakes were kind of combined when the study was done. And so this has kind of been on our radar for a while, but City Council finally gave the directive to kind of look into this property and look in a way of acquiring either the land or access to it, and we're currently going to get an easement over this property for the stormwater pond. This next figure here shows the delineated wetlands on site. You can see the channel that you saw in the previous picture outlined there, as well as a small wetland just off to the side. The configuration of the stormwater pond will kind of intercept that stormwater where it's currently flowing now, and the other part of the pond will be constructed over that small wetland there. And so even though you're kind of getting a wetland changed into a different kind of a wetland, because there is untreated stormwater coming into it, it does require a wetland permit and replacement plan. The wetland is very small, and it is of very low quality. It's currently all reed canary grass, which is an invasive plant. So it's nothing of high quality that would be impacted here. And I think the overall benefit of the pond and treatment of the stormwater is a good trade-off. But with the Wetland Conservation Act and the requirements of that, the city is required to replace those impacts at a 2-to-1 ratio, and we're proposing to do that through the purchase of wetland bank credits, which is a very common way to deal with those mitigation requirements. This next figure here kind of shows the design of the pond. You can see on the edge here, that's where the channel is, and so the pond would, the edge of the pond would match up with that channel, and then you can see the kind of berm or the edge of the pond coming out here, and the current wetland is located right in there. So the wetland bank is in the major watershed, which meets the requirements of the Wetland Conservation Act. City staff has reviewed this along with technical evaluation panel, Dakota County Soil and Water Conservation District, Board of Water and Soil Resources, Minnesota DNR. All those folks have looked at this and given their comments, which we did not receive any negative comments or any issues with the proposed plan. So With that, I'll stand for any questions that commissioners may have.
Mr. Chair, I have one question.
Yes.
What's the zoning on the there's quite a bit of acreage right around this area. What's the status of that and long-range plans for that?
Well, the current zoning is for commercial and residential use. It obviously has not been developed yet, so there is always an opportunity for that zoning to potentially change. The current landowners obviously have been in contact with us for us to get the easement over the land, but I'm not sure what they're looking to do with the rest of it as far as development goes.
So the pond has some planned capacity for additional development.
Yes, it's well, when they come in for their permit to potentially develop that land, they will still have to do their own stormwater management on site, because we do have infiltration requirements and other requirements that the ponding isn't going to account for. So they still will be responsible for doing some stormwater treatment on their own site.
Thank you.
Daryl, can we back up a couple to the there you go.
Yep.
About how many acres are we looking at there? Do you have an estimate?
Of the total site or of the pond?
That the total site in that image.
I am not sure what the total acreage is of those parcels. I know that the stormwater pond is, the impact of that wetland is only a total of 0.29 acres. I'm not sure. I have some folks from SEH here. I'm not sure if they're aware of the total acreage that the stormwater pond will be treating or not.
That it will be treating?
Yeah. But obviously the pond was designed to treat all the actual area that the pond is treating is not in this picture. It's just off the picture on the other side of.
I understand
42,
that.
35.
I'm interested in the impact on this area and the total acres relevant to that. But you've answered my question. I can look it up on my own in a later time. It's not that important.
Question.
Yes.
Isn't there like a sewer pipe that's exposed to that, and what's going to be done with that?
Yes, I do know that the sewer pipe that runs through there is going to be lowered slightly, and then it will be covered up as part of the process. And so actually right now you can see where that, right here where this channel comes down and enters into the lake, there is a sewer pipe that runs along here, and it is actually exposed as it goes over that channel. And so as part of this process, the emergency overflow for the pond will essentially take the stormwater in a high water situation on an overland flow into the pond. It will be riprap and a sturdy material, and then it will also take that pipe and it won't be exposed anymore, which will be a benefit, obviously, to not having that pipe hanging out over the stream there.
But the pipe itself is not going to be, the height of it's not going to be adjusted, is that correct? Or are you going to adjust that?
I believe the pipe, is it going to be lowered?
The pipe will be lowered to allow that berm to be built over it, as well as some insulation, because it will have shallower cover where that emergency overflow area goes. So it will be lowered as part of the project through that section. Here, if you have that other plan sheet that shows, basically it's going to be lowered
Yeah.
from.
I'm going to come up and use the microphone, yeah.
My name is Ron Leaf. I'm with SEH, one of the engineers that worked on this project. So the portion of the sanitary sewer line that's going to be lowered is approximately from this point here over on the east side to this first manhole here on the west side. So this is the area that it currently bridges over the channel. So this whole segment's going to be lowered, and then where this overflow is, as I said, it would be, the sanitary sewer line would be insulated because it is a relatively shallow cover over that point where the overflow channel is.
One follow-up question. On the, I don't know if you want to call it the creek or the water flow, where is that coming from? Because it appears it just comes out of the rocks. Is that you're saying, clarify to me where that channel of water really is coming from. Because the last time I was there, it seemed like it just appeared.
If you go basically farther upstream, there is a pipe. There's a storm sewer pipe, a large one, that daylights. It's pretty steep in that. Oh, there you go.
Right at this point, right there.
Yeah.
It's pretty steep in that area. So essentially, the pipe comes down at daylights there, and then the water flows through that channel the rest of the way into the North Twin Lake.
That pipe is on the order of 6 feet in diameter, so it's a big pipe. You can walk up in it.
Wow.
Okay.
Daryl, on that large stormwater pond that we constructed on the Apple Valley Burnsville border, I forget the name of it.
Yeah, it's Whitney Pond.
There were calculations on how much phosphorus that was going to remove from the runoff. Does this have any impact on that as well, or not?
No, this is the Crystal Keller Lake is upstream of this, and so that water flows towards these lakes and ponds. So this won't have any impact on like Crystal or Keller Lake. This is farther downstream.
Excuse me, was the question, I understand, I just wonder how much phosphorus or what it's going to take out, in relationship to what that pond was going to do.
Yes,
That's what I was looking at, is the question, is that what is expected to, once this is built, how much chemicals it looks like it's going to be able to remove? Since we had that on our other one, I was just wondering if we have that information on this, since we're going to build it.
I know it was designed. I don't know, Ron, if you have the exact pounds. We obviously did take a look at that. And we tried to design it to the city's stormwater standard as far as TSS and phosphorus removal for the upstream watershed of that Golden Triangle area of Burnsville.
And this goes right at South Cross Drive, is it?
Yeah,
Now, is there any storm water running right from South Cross into these ponds?
directly from the road, yes.
Okay.
Directly from South Cross, yes.
Any other questions?
No.
So do we need action on this then, Daryl?
Yeah, what we would be looking for is for the commission to recommend approval of the wetland replacement plan. That's the piece that's kind of up for review. And any replacement plan that the city does require city council approval. So we always bring it to the commission here and then also to city council.
Do we have to purchase or get some wetland from somewhere else then, because we're abandoning this little wetland here? Isn't any concern?
It is. We've already identified the wetland bank. It's in LeSueur County, and actually there's the next project that I'm going to talk about will need wetland bank credits, and they're both proposed to be purchased from the same wetland bank. And that bank is in the major watershed, so it meets all the requirements of the location and type of wetland credits that we would need to buy.
Any other questions from staff or commissioners? Does someone wish to make a motion to this then?
I will move that we approve this particular action.
I will second it. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Thank you, Daryl. I guess we're moving on to the next item then. Review a wetland permanent replacement plan for the construction of a stormwater pond in the Minnesota River quadrant just west of Yellow Freight.
Thank you. Yeah, this is a very similar type of a project. This stormwater pond will be intercepting a storm sewer pipe similar to that one that daylights. And the purpose of this pond will be to treat some existing storm water that obviously is coming through that pipe, but also to provide some stormwater treatment for future development. The city council has identified this section of the city, kind of north of 13 and west of 35, the Minnesota River quadrant. And right now it is a lot of industrial type use. But over time, some of those uses are going to change, and we're going to see a lot of redevelopment happening in that area. And so one of the things that City Council wanted to do was find areas where we could put stormwater ponding in to make that redevelopment easier and more successful. And so there was studies done, and I think in the background you'll notice there was a study done previously and then updated again in 2011. City Council is aware of those updates, and this location was identified through those plans. This shows a little bit of the location here. You can see 13 and 35. Yellow Freight business is located right here, and then this is the section that we're looking at for the channel and the stormwater pond. This kind of shows the pond design and where the wetland impacts will be. This is where the storm sewer pipe outlets, and then the current stormwater flows just through a channel down this way, and you can see this blue line is the delineated wetland here, and that's kind of where the water flows, and then it takes off and heads west here at this end of the lot. And so the part that would be impacted is this part kind of shaded in yellow, and you can see the stormwater pond, the embankments here. So the stormwater would actually be sitting in a pond in this location, and so only a portion of the channel will be impacted. But this particular project will provide treatment to the current stormwater that's coming through, and then also for some future stormwater. And it's similar to the last site, replaced at a 2-to-1 ratio. These wetland credits would be coming out of the same wetland bank in LeSueur County, same major watershed, very similar to the last project that was talked about. And with that, I'll answer any questions that commissioners might have.
Any questions from
I don't know anything
commissioners?
about this one.
Any question?
Yes, Mr. Wolf?
I'm familiar with this general area, Darrell, but I haven't actually walked over that patch of ground, I don't believe.
Mm-hmm.
I do consider the Minnesota River Valley to be a really superior wildlife area still at this point, although the river is heavily polluted. It contains an amazing amount of wildlife. I am guessing, I don't believe you mentioned, this is pretty degraded land right here. It's been heavily disturbed. We're not likely to find any kind of rare plant, or has it been checked?
Yeah, this site is, poor quality, similar to the last site as far as the plant community that's there. There's been a lot of development around it. Historically, this may have been a high-quality site, but that would have been many, many years ago with the different uses that have taken place on this land. It is not in great condition anymore.
Can I follow up?
Yes, Mr. Wolf.
And also, just to be sure I know where we're talking about here, if I were to go further north past pond design and wetland impacts, the printing, I would be into the quarry?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
And this end right down here is County Road 5. Essentially, when you take County Road 5 across Highway 13, this is right where County Road 5 ends, basically, right now.
Very good. Thank you.
So, Darrell, where is the outflow going to then here on the end?
Currently, this all drains to the Minnesota River. And so for this pond, the water would still continue on that path, but it would just be treated, essentially. And so when that pond outlets, it will still end up in the Minnesota River, but hopefully in better shape than it currently is.
So there's a natural outlet at the end there with the blue lines?
Yeah, currently this is all basically just a ditch that drains the water right now. And we didn't delineate it further, but you can kind of see it. It kind of turns here and then flows this way to the west and then heads north again to the river.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
Daryl, I'm wondering about, is there a plan in place? I see quite a bit of parking here, yellow freight and business to the left there. Will those lots drain off into this pond as well?
Yeah, I mean, the Yellow Freight is an older development, but these other buildings that you see over here do have some stormwater management on site. And then obviously this parcel is currently empty, but it will develop in the future. And so, as I mentioned, there are still some stormwater requirements that they may have to meet. In certain parts of the city, infiltration is not allowed because of groundwater effects and things like that, and I think this is in one of those locations. So this pond could provide treatment for those new development sites. They may also be asked to do some stormwater management on site, but we won't know that until the particular applications come in and we review exactly what's proposed to be developed on those sites. But that's the hope, is that some of these other locations will ultimately develop, and we'll be prepared for that when they do.
Thank you.
Any other questions from commissioners? So, Daryl, I'm assuming that the same action is required on this one?
Yes, it is.
Okay, we need a motion to approve then, if we want to go that route, or just a motion?
I'll move to approve.
All right.
Second.
I have a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. The next one, I believe this is our annual review, Daryl?
Yes, this is the kind of annual deer management update. Every year the city does an annual report on the deer management program as it's taken place over the previous year. And I think, in the future you'll start seeing these called kind of 2012-13 annual report, because really the way the program runs is kind of on an April to April basis, because our archery hunts and things like that happen in the fall. Our sharpshooting takes place starting in December, January, and then we wrap up at the end of March. And so the deer removal activities kind of cover both years. And so we've made a decision. You can see on the title of this report, it's kind of the 2012-2013 annual report, and we'll continue that so it's a little less confusing for everybody in the future as they review this. Just some of the details. We have an education piece to the plan. A feeding ban was put in place back in 2001 when this program started. We do several different kinds of monitoring, and then ultimately, if needed, there's a population control strategy as well. Education, we put stuff on the web page, also the Burnsville Bulletin, as far as it relates to deer feeding particularly, also some things people can do in their yards to lessen deer impacts and those type of things. Feeding complaints. For the 2012-2013 season, we had one complaint, which is about standard. I'm sure there's more people than that potentially feed, but at this point we're getting 1 to 2 complaints a year usually, and then we handle those on a case-by-case basis. Normally, once we let people know that we're aware they're feeding and that they can't, we do follow up and kind of check periodically, but up till now everyone has complied once we've talked to them and asked them to quit feeding. And so the recommendation is just continue that. We send them letters once we find out they're feeding, and then follow up after that, and that seems to have been working quite well. Monitoring methods, we have our aerial counts that we try to do every year, weather permitting. We have monitoring forms that are available online that people can fill out. And we did get the form has always been online, but in the past people had to either print it out and then kind of scan it and email it to me or mail it to me. And one of the recommendations from this commission last year was to get it so it could be just filled out and submitted online. We did make that change. And so now people are able to go on, kind of fill the report out on our website, click submit, and it ends up in my email box. And so that has seemed to work well. We've gotten several of those that have came in since that system's been up, so I think people are using it, and I think that was a good change. And then we also try to keep track of the car deer collisions. Probably not an exact number, but we try to get information from several different agencies and people in the city to get as accurate number as we can to see what impacts are happening there. I'll go into more detail on this stuff as we go through the presentation, but just a quick overview. We were able to do a count this year. We counted 207 deer in the city. Those monitoring report forms, we received 5. 3 were just people sending in the number of deer they were seeing, and then 2 were people kind of giving information on the landscaping that was getting eaten, deer eating things in their yards. I do expect that number to go up for this report next year because that online form is a little easier to submit now. And I know since we wrapped this up in April, I think I've already received 2 of those forms submitted in the first few months here this new season. So we may see more of those reports coming in because of that. Just on the monitoring aspect, you can see that we've got our population goals for each section of town. You can see the 2012 numbers versus what our 2013 survey showed. Overall, when you think about the whole city, a very small change. It did go down slightly, but very consistent to what we had previous year. But each section, there was different changes in the section. So overall, as a city, we saw a similar number, but the distribution was a little bit different. Northwest population was down a lot, and then places like East Central and West Central Burnsville, we saw the numbers increase. And we're not exactly sure why that is, other than deer move around and different weather and things like that could cause those deer to be in different areas. There's been some development in Savage, which is very close to the west central portion of our management units, so that may have pushed some more deer into our parks because of the development that's been happening over there. This is kind of the map that we prepare based on our GPS coordinates of when we're flying over the city. It's a little bit hard to see, but you can certainly see where the dots are and see where the heavy population is. It's still in the northeast section of Burnsville and Southwest, which would be expected because that is certainly where we have the largest areas of deer habitat in Burnsville. And this information will also be available online. Once we get it through the commission, we'll post this to our website for residents to be able to view. One other change that we did this year, basically because a lot of times our constraint is the time we have the helicopter. It's expensive to rent and be up flying around. But this year we had the ability to fly essentially a quarter mile. Generally we had stuck very close to just Burnsville's border, so we could try to get as much area in as we could. This year we were able to make good use of our time while we were in the air, and we flew some of the deer habitat areas a quarter mile outside of the city limit to try to get a more accurate count, because obviously deer don't know where the Burnsville border is, and any deer that's that close could easily come into Burnsville. And so you'll see a couple numbers right along the border, and same with over in Allomagnet. This is in Apple Valley, but it's still part of Allomagnet Park, a continuous wooded area. And so we did make that change this year, and hopefully we'll be able to do that in the future to keep getting these consistent numbers. Our car deer collisions, we had a total of 45 crashes this year. That was up a little bit from last year, but it is within the range of what we've seen. I think on the high end we've had 55, 60 collisions in the city. On the low end maybe 25 to 30. So this is kind of in the middle of that, a little bit higher than last year, but not out of the normal for what we've seen over the past 10 years. And this is a map that we put together of where those car deer collisions are. Honestly, the map is very similar to what we've seen in the past. When you've got those deer habitat areas next to busy roads, that's where you tend to see more of the collisions. The one spot here along Allomagnet, we didn't count a lot of deer over there, but we did count some on the Apple Valley side. So hopefully we can do some removals there this year. Might help with those. But overall, very similar to what we've seen in the past. On the monitoring side of things, we're recommending to continue with our methods with the online form, the aerial survey, and then collecting the car deer crash information. And that way we're consistent with what we've been doing to be able to compare year to year. The population control section of the program, generally we've had archery hunts on different areas of public land in the city. And then we also utilize the Burnsville Police Department to do sharpshooting in other locations. For the archery side of things, we do have a guideline that was started in 2001. We revised the firearm ordinance in 2003. We made another small tweak to that last year to allow some folks, if they're bordering a park that is having an archery hunt, that they may hunt on private property. And that is coming from one of the parts of this program was to encourage hunting on private property where it's safe and can be allowed, because obviously those deer that are getting removed through private hunting is a very cost-effective way to help manage the population. And on Burnsville's public archery hunt in the public area, only 3 deer were removed in 2012. We had the one hunt in Kelleher Park. That number was down quite a bit from what we've had in the past. I think we've had a high of 15 deer removed, with an average probably around the 7-8 deer number when we do those hunts. So a little bit of a dip last year, but hopefully we can get those numbers up this season. So here's what we did in 2012-2013. We had a very successful year with the sharpshooting program. You can see Southwest Burnsville is archery hunts between what Burnsville did in Kelleher Park, and then Murphy-Hannerhan in Three Rivers Park District does an archery hunt as well, but only a small number or a small percentage of their park is actually in Burnsville. And so we try to prorate their numbers to kind of count what was actually removed in Burnsville. So we got 3 out of their hunt and then 3 out of ours for that 6 deer in Southwest. Northeast, we removed 40 deer through the sharpshooting program, which was a big increase over some past years. And then we also got 6 deer in East Central, which is over by Terrace Oaks and Wolk Park, and that matched the goal that we had for that area. So we had a total of 52 deer removed, and that is the most deer that we've removed, probably since the first few years of this program. And so I think we're really seeing the benefit of our police department having a few years under their belt of working with the program. We had good weather last year for deer removal, and so we kind of had things come together and had a very successful year in that aspect. And so looking ahead, you can see for this upcoming season, we've got some of the same areas in Northeast. The minimum recommended harvest there is at 19, which is lower than we've seen it in a long time, which I think is reflecting all the work we've put in up there, especially last year and the 3 previous seasons. We're starting to get that number to a manageable range where we think we can kind of hit that minimum number and get that at a sustainable level where we're not having maybe those 50, 60 deer removals that we've been seeing in the past. East Central, that number went up quite a bit. We counted a lot more deer there this year than we have in the past. And we also have a lot of habitat management going on in that park. And so the goal there is for 5 deer per square mile, which is why you see that number down at 4. So we've got a recommended harvest there of 32 deer. And then West Central, which is in the Kramer Park, Sunset Pond area, that's where we saw another increase in the deer population. So we've got a recommended harvest of 23 deer there. And then down in Southeast, which is Alamagnet area, we've got a recommended harvest of 4, which is a fairly small number, but something that hopefully we should get in and be able to do that and keep that area at a manageable level. So overall, I think these numbers, I should mention Southwest Burnsville, that's an area that Through this program, we have made a decision to try and stay out of there with sharpshooting because there is some opposition to that. We do have a lot more private hunting happening in this area. That's also where our public archery hunt happens. Three Rivers Park District does management in their park for deer removals. And so we are still looking at trying to get that number down with archery hunting. I have talked with Three Rivers Park District and the residents who live down there and informed them that if we can't get that number down, we may have to revisit the possibility of doing sharpshooting in southwest Burnsville. But at this point, I think we'd like to see putting some emphasis on them and meeting with those folks and kind of letting them know that we encourage them to remove deer, maybe making some tweaks to our program. Three Rivers is looking at maybe altering their archery hunt system to see if we can get those numbers down that way before we make the decision to go in with sharpshooters. So that's why you see that number is high, but I'm not talking about sharpshooting there. Overall, the numbers are in the other areas, I think, are manageable for our sharpshooting crew if we have good weather and we can have a good 2 or 3 month season, that we can start seeing some success with those removal numbers. We're not seeing the 70s and 50s that are probably unattainable with our budget and time constraints in any one area. So I know that we're trying to locate some areas to do removals in these parts of town that are obviously safe. The police department handles the safety aspect of those efforts. But definitely, I think encouraging, especially to see Northeast down at 19 instead of 50, 60, which we have seen those numbers there in recent years. So this just kind of sums up what I've been talking about. There's the 4 areas that we're recommending to do some sharpshooting this next season. And the site-specific areas are based on kind of where we saw the deer in those in the aerial survey, and obviously the safety issue, trying to work on public property, and the police department will be out this summer kind of fine-tuning those exact locations. Recommendation obviously would be to continue the archery hunt at Kelleher Park. Here is the proposed archery hunt dates. The one thing I want to point out is I know at the discussions we had last year there was some concern about Saturday hunts in Kelleher Park. We had been doing actually 5 weekends of hunts with all of them basically being Thursday through Saturday. We did reduce it down to 4 hunt periods, and then last year we did 2 Thursday, Friday hunt periods and 2 Thursday to Saturday hunt periods. The Metro Bowhunters Resource Base felt pretty strongly that losing those Saturday hunts had an impact on the deer removal numbers because obviously they can get a lot of hours in the woods on those Saturdays. We do still get a good turnout during the week when folks can get in the park and hunt, but obviously Saturday is an easier day for people to hunt than a Thursday or Friday. And so they wanted all the Saturdays back in. I've included one more Saturday in my recommendation, putting that last weekend in October, the 24th through the 26th, still leaving the second weekend there, the 17th to 18th. So we would have 3 Saturday hunts as a way to see if putting that day back in, possibly giving the hunters a little more time in the woods, that we could increase the removal numbers from last year and get closer to our average that we've had on previous years. And so that's the one change I wanted to highlight versus what was proposed last year. Otherwise, the 4 kind of week time frame is still the same. It's the same last 2 weekends or weeks in October and the first 2 in November. And with that, I will stand for any questions on the deer program.
Okay, thank you, Darrell. Any questions from commissioners? Yes.
Darrell, I have a couple. First, a comment. I lived near Terrace Oaks, and there were more deer this past year than I've ever seen. We had anywhere from 7 to 10 deer at one time while going through there. And they're fun. Use up a lot of corn feeding them, but other than that, but they're great for grandkids. What is the cost per deer to harvest?
That's a good question. In previous years, the cost, I think I may have mentioned this before, I think the first year that we did removals, we were, around like $400 a deer. 2 years ago, it was around that same number. This last year, we were down around $275, which is a big improvement. And I think many reasons played into that. The weather was certainly one. The officers that we're using, we've had the same ones for each of the last 3 years, and so they had a training 2 years ago from a professional consulting company that does this work. They obviously took that training. They did work on some things in the off season, and obviously just their own experience of being out there for 3 years now, that they were more efficient in their efforts, and so we saw that number drop quite a bit, and we still think there's room to drop that number down even more.
But if last year you harvested, 53 deer?
It was 46 with the sharpshooters. Yep.
And now it's going to be almost 150 deer?
Well, that 150 number also includes Southwest Burnsville. That's the total. So when you look at those numbers, I can try to get back to it quickly here. So you can see that we're not proposing any sharpshooting in Southwest Burnsville. So you can take basically 68 deer off that 146 as to what we're looking at for sharpshooting.
So that's going to not really damage the budget too much?
No, I mean we've come in under budget all of the last previous years, and so if they get a little more efficient out there, hitting this goal of 80 deer approximately is optimistic. It's a pretty high goal to set, and obviously we don't control all the variables such as the weather, but I think now that we have more locations, we're going to be able to be even more efficient, because before we were really working just in Northeast, and so we kind of had 3 sites up there that were working. And so as you use those sites more and more, even when you're doing a good job, the deer tend to get educated a little bit that you're working that area all the time. And so the fact that we've got different spots around the city that we're going to be moving, there'll be less pressure at each individual site, which should make each time they sit more productive. And so I think I can't say that we're going to hit our 80 deer, but I think, we got 46 last year. I think we're going to be able to improve on that number if we have good weather and come pretty close.
I also noticed that at least 2 or 3 deer were disreputable in terms of looking healthy. All it was a bag of bones walking through the yards. What happens to them? I'm sure they couldn't survive a winter.
If there's a deer that is sick or is not healthy, it may die, and nature takes its course, so to speak. I'm assuming. If it's in an area that we get a phone call on it, then Burnsville Animal Control does come pick those deer up. But if it's in a wooded area or something, and we have coyotes in the area and other things, and just decomposition, that's what happens.
And my last comment is, I'd like to thank you for doing such a good job, but how did you train 2 mamas to have babies in my backyard 4 days ago? It was just amazing. I walked back there, and didn't notice it. I turned around, and there was this little teeny thing all snuggled up, and Mama had walked away. I was pretty sure I saw it being born. On the other side of my house, I walked around, and there's another one, brand new one, just sitting there. And so the next afternoon, one of them went away, but the one up on top on the hill was still there, so I called Animal Control. And they came over, and this young lady had never experience trying to catch a little baby deer before. So she went and grabbed it, put a blanket around it, and all of a sudden there was this crashing coming through the woods, and here comes Mama. And I'm standing there with my camera. Do I want to run or do I want to take a picture? It was really exciting. But she showed up. But after, 30 hours, as you said, there are too many creatures out there that like to have baby deer for breakfast.
Yeah, I would just kind of for other folks too. Deer do leave their fawns alone. They, try to put them in a place where they're hidden and concealed, but they can leave them for long periods of time. And I would recommend folks, if you find a deer in that situation, just to let them be, because more likely than not, the mama deer is around somewhere and is aware of kind of what's happening. But they do leave them when they need to go. They try to get them hidden and keep them in a safe location, but they do leave them for long periods of time, and that's just part of the way they operate.
Yes,
Mr. Chair, I have some questions, if I may.
Sure.
Well, we've had discussions about the deer management program before, so you probably know where I'm going with these. You're not asking for approval tonight. This is a review, and we are going to look to approve a plan later. Is that correct?
Actually, I'm looking for approval tonight. The only part of this plan that gets sent on to City Council is the archery hunt dates. That's the main piece. The only other piece would be if you had a recommendation to change one of the existing pieces of the program. Then if you had a recommendation to change, one of the other aspects, then that would maybe need to go to City Council at a later date, and maybe we would need to talk about that. The archery hunt dates is if there are no other changes, then that's the piece that I send to City Council, and they do a resolution authorizing the hunts for those dates. And we do like to get those hunt dates out, so that they can be posted in early July. And so if we can get a resolution on the hunt dates, that would be something I would be looking for.
Yes, Mr. Wolf?
May I follow up?
Yes.
I'll come back to the hunt dates in just a minute. In the past, we've talked a little bit about the cost of doing the monitoring, and you will recall that I was somewhat confused about the numbers, that the numbers that you had published a year or two ago included preparing a report and so forth, and I was looking at those as being the cost of going up and doing the survey. And one of the things that I thought at the time, and still think, is that no matter what your count is, you're always going to take almost as many deer as you can, or it would seem to me that you should. So I'd be interested in those figures sometime. Has the increase in the cost of gasoline, for example, fuel, significantly increased the cost of going up and making those counts? Do you know if there's been a significant change there?
I do, and it has not been a significant change. I think part of the reason for that is at the time that we do these aerial surveys, the helicopter companies are very slow. In the summer, they're doing, agricultural spraying, mosquitoes, all those type of things. In the winter, there's not as much need for helicopter renting and use. And so, if we were to try to book them in July to do something, their cost would be significantly higher than I think what we pay in January and February. But I think we've used the same company probably at least since 2006. And since then, I think we've seen an increase of $25 an hour. And so typically we rent for 4 hours. So the price has only gone up about $100 total versus what we paid then to what we pay now. And that's, I think, just partially supply and demand for their use.
I think my position's unchanged on that then, that I can support going up and getting that information. So let's talk just briefly about the archery dates, if we can. Mm-hmm. It's still my opinion that you're putting hunters into the park at the very nicest time of year. If you were going to pick 6 Saturdays that you'd use the park, I imagine that the 3 that you're going to close it for archery would be among those 6. It's the fall, the colors, temperature is nice. By that time in October, often the insect populations have been cut down, mosquitoes in particular. It's a prime time to be in there. And I know that in my neighborhood, there are people who want to be in there on those days. In fact, a year or two ago, we ran into a complaint about it. It wasn't because of the Saturday hunt per se as it was being surprised by the hunters. But there's no doubt in my mind that a significant proportion of the population bordering Kellert would like to be able to use that park on those October Saturdays. That's a nice time. And I question whether the benefits, when you consider the overall size of the deer herd, are that significant. What would you suspect would be the added number of deer that you would take? I think you said that in the past, an average might have been 8 deer, 9 deer. We got 3 last year, so it's a change of 5 deer. And it's from that area that includes Murphy-Hanrahan, Kellert, and a lot of private property that is still fairly undeveloped. And the overall deer herd in that area is over, what was the figure, do you remember, in the Southwest?
I think the total count was just over 100. I could look back, and it was 108 or something.
And that would be the Burnsville count. So that wouldn't include much of Murphy-Hanrahan, which is outside of Burnsville.
Correct. It just includes that quarter acre outside of Burnsville.
I think that there's a lot of movement, I'm sure you would agree, between the deer herd in Murphy-Hanrahan all the way to its western and southern borders up to Kellert and into those private undeveloped areas.
Yes.
So we're maybe talking 200, 220 deer, and the proposal is that we will give up those 3 Saturdays so that we can get 5 more. That doesn't strike me as a payoff worthy of closing the park for those 3 days. Now, my fellow commissioners may disagree. That's a matter of opinion, not a matter of science. But I'll go on the record right now and say that I would personally oppose putting hunting back on those Saturdays. And that's enough for me.
Thank you, Commissioner
Thank you.
Wolf. Any other comments on this? Okay, we need do we need a action here then?
Yes, the
action this Saturday, is that?
I would need a recommendation to the city council on the archery hunt dates.
All right, I will move that we ask you to go back and take out those Saturdays and see if I get a second.
All right,
Second.
you have a second?
I have a question.
Yes.
Is the motion to remove the one Saturday that I put back in, or all the Saturdays?
I'll go back to what we did last year, to remove the Saturday that you put back.
Thank you.
I'll second that one, too.
All right, we have a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
Post.
No opposed? Motion carries. Anyway, to remove one Saturday.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Next item. Dear, are you the presenter on this one as well?
No, I'm going to let Ron Lee
All
from
right.
SCH here handle this one.
All right. Reveal Burnsville's stormwater pollution prevention program in the 2012 annual report.
Thank you, Commissioners. Again, my name is Ron Leaf. I'm with SEH. I've been working with city staff on this program, this NPDS stormwater program, since about 2003 when the program first was started. So it's, I was thinking about that earlier, it's 10 years now. So this program's been around a while and it's not going away. I was asked by staff to help out with this year's annual review since Jeremy Strelo moved on to another job, and been working with staff, so I think it made sense, and I'm happy to kind of step in and give you this overview of the program from 2012. We're going to look at the overall program. I understand that many of you have seen this. Oh, thank you. Yeah. F5. What if I do a slideshow? So what we're going to look at is just an overview of the background of the program, talk a little bit about Burnsville's specific MS4 permit, the status of compliance, which we have to do as part of the annual review, and then talk a few highlights from 2012, and then touch on next steps as the permit is being revised again. So that's going to create some challenges for staff to get that permit up to date. So the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System, or NPDES permit, is established under the Clean Water Act. The EPA is the main arm of the federal government which administers that. In Minnesota, it's passed down to the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, and then the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency establishes the requirements and puts out the permit, of which Burnville is about one of about 220 some permittees within the state. It's a general permit, meaning that permit applies broadly to all permittees, cities, counties, some institutions such as prisons and other government institutions. And as I mentioned, coverage for many of these cities began in 2003. The program requires preparation of a stormwater pollution prevention program, or SWIP, which, if you've seen some of the stormwater projects come through on a site-by-site basis, there's a similar SWIP. That's for a site. This is actually for a municipality or a permittee for a program as a whole. Each program has 6 minimum control measures, or MCMs, which in turn has a number of best management practices, and in turn each of those BMPs has measurable goals, and that's what we kind of measure ourselves against. In this case, Burnsville has 37 best management practices that cover a broad range of topics, and we will look at those in a little more detail. Those 6 control measures are public outreach and education, public participation and involvement, illicit discharge detection and elimination. So what illicit discharge is really, what that should not go into the storm sewer system is. Did somebody dump a bucket of paint or have a fuel spill? Things like that. So the city is required to have a program and actively manage that program. Construction site runoff control, looking at construction sites to minimize the discharges. Post-construction runoff control, putting in ponds and treatment systems like we talked about in a couple earlier items with those regional stormwater ponds. Then finally, pollution prevention, good housekeeping for municipal operations or activities, things like sweeping the streets and taking care of salt, sand use on the city streets. So there's a number of activities that city staff actually have to follow. In addition to those 6 minimum control measures, there are some other permit provisions which Burnsville needs to follow, including what's called the non-degradation requirements. Burnsville was one of 30 cities that had to prepare a non-degradation plan, which looked at pollutant loads to waters throughout the city. And then, of course, the city also has to look at all the impaired waters within its border on an annual basis and identify what, if any, additional practices or methods for reducing those loads must be incorporated into the program. So that's a quick look at the types of things that the permit covers. As I mentioned, we need to look at the status of compliance. Overall, Burnsville has the permit that's been approved by the MPCA. Staff had not identified any revisions to the SWIP at this time, and in that sense, saying that the permit is, the city's applying those permit conditions and complying with the requirements of the permit. So meeting the requirements and in some cases exceeding those requirements. I mentioned briefly that the MPCA will be reissuing, or has reissued, the permit. They adopted a revised permit on May 21st, just a couple of weeks ago, and that permit will go into effect on August 1st if it's not challenged through legal actions by either the Minnesota Cities Stormwater Coalition or other groups. But for all practical purposes, we expect that that would be in effect as of August 1st of 2013. So that will certainly require the city to take another look at this overall program and update it based on that revised permit. Quick look at some highlights from 2012 in the public education outreach and participation area. City continues to have Lake Association meetings with Lake Alamagnet, Crystal Lake. There were 6 groups that volunteered for storm drain stenciling events in 2012. There's a number of water quality literature items that were distributed at meetings and at city events. The city sends its annual water quality report of the status of water quality in city lakes to all residents, and then has a number of Adopt a Park, Adopt a Street, and Adopt a Pond projects on an annual basis, including in 2012. For the illicit discharge detection and elimination control measure, the city continues to GPS survey all of the public storm sewer. So an area gets a new development, or the city staff does some street reconstruction and puts in new storm sewer, they locate those with GPS coordinates and add those to the map, and that's a requirement of the permit so that they have an accurate record of where all the storm system is and where it drains, so that they can track it if there is a spill of some type in the system. And staff continues to inspect all the outfalls that discharge to city surface waters, and also maintain a discharge hotline. And in fact, in 2012, there was one discharge identified, and that was monitored directly by city staff, and then it was referred to the MPCA duty officer for follow-up action to make sure cleanup. I think in this case, Bay West was notified, and they come in and do whatever cleanup and make sure things are in good order. So the system worked in that case. Notifications took place, and the spill was taken care of. For construction site stormwater controls, there were 12 projects. This would be development site type projects that were reviewed by staff. There were 57 site inspections that were conducted of those projects. And of those 57 site inspections, a number of them, 29 times, there was some non-compliance found, but those items were quickly rectified and returned to compliance. So that's, again, a testament to why the program is in place, so that those things can be identified and corrected quickly. For post-construction stormwater management, this is the ponds, the rain gardens, those things that treat the stormwater after the construction project is done. And you see the numbers there for the types of things that have been put in. So look at like 8 infiltration areas. I think one of those was probably the project at Lac La Vanne, which was the infiltration, the rain garden systems along the new boat ramp area as well as down by the lake. 2 new ponds were put in 2012. Now, I'm going to jump back quick to the previous 2 items since you asked the question. 2 ponds that will be put in 2013 that you'll hear about next year's report would be the Yellow Freight Pond and the North Twin Pond. And so for North Twin, I think the question was asked, what's that removing? For North Twin, it's about a 160-acre drainage area, and it's removing about 72 pounds of phosphorus a year based on the numbers that we used in the design process. For Yellow Freight, it's about a 258-acre drainage area in its future condition, and that's removing about 136 pounds of phosphorus a year. So pretty significant amount of phosphorus removal on those 2 projects. And all these projects listed here have their own level of pollutant removal. So again, a reason why these projects are important. Pollution prevention, good housekeeping for municipal operations. Again, we talked about the inspections. The city staff inspected all of the outfalls that were allotted for inspection in 2012, all of the pollution control devices, those sump manholes, rain gardens, ponds. Actually, the ponds and sediment basins then are down below. The requirement is to inspect 20% of those every year, and so in this case, city staff inspected a little over that, 24%. And then conducted the annual spring and fall street sweeping, removing some 1,600 cubic yards of material from the streets. So keeping that material out of the ponds, out of the lakes, out of the receiving waters. An impaired waters review was completed, and all those studies for impaired waters have been completed, with the exception of the Minnesota River bacteria study, which is being completed by other regional and state agencies like the MPCA, and as well as the mercury impairments, which are addressed on a regional basis. There's nothing really the city of Burnsville can do to address mercury, so that's done on a bigger scale. And the TMDL reports for Crystal and Keller Lakes has been approved, so staff are incorporating those recommendations into projects like you just heard about for North Twin and Yellow Freight, so looking for opportunities to make improvements. Next steps, we're here to collect comments that you have or that the general public has on the annual report, which is in draft form right now and will be completed and submitted to MPCA by June 30th. And then any SWIP revisions are going to be taking place, as I talked about, based on that new permit. That's effective August 1st. And actually, Burnsville has a little bit more time than August 1st. You actually have 150 days following that August 1st date to submit the new permit application. So end of the year, a new permit application goes in, and we start the process all over again with some new requirements. I will stop there. I'd be happy to answer any questions, and just note that if you do have comments after tonight, that Ryan Peterson is the person to direct those to, and Ryan will get them to me so we can compile and complete this annual report. So thank you for your time.
Mr. Chair,
Yes,
I'd like to ask a few questions.
yes, Commissioner Nagwa?
Ron, we've talked about some of the monitoring of the ponds around the city, and as you said, 20% every 5 years, and those monitoring are for sediment and erosion. Okay. My question is, earlier in this program, you used the word pollution, and how do you know, what is the definition of pollution?
That's a great question, because there's a number of things that the permit specifically addresses, and then there's things which it doesn't specifically address.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
So the permit addresses specific pollutants like total suspended solids or sediment. It also addresses total phosphorus, which is the weed growth limiting factor. The permit also addresses specifically runoff volume, which can be a pollutant for certain water bodies, but it doesn't specifically address any chemicals, if you will, but indirectly it does, and that's the illicit discharge thing, which says anything that does not belong in the stormwater at a concentration that can harm the water body is considered a pollutant. And so that, in that sense, you look at runoff volume. There was a lot of debate with the cities of should runoff volume be considered a pollutant, because it's just the water. It's just more water. But it is considered a pollutant in the eyes of the permit and as from the MPCA, because more water volume can impact some water bodies. For example, a stream, more volume, longer period of time, can erode a stream bank channel at an accelerated pace compared to a lower volume. So anything that does not belong in the stormwater is a kind of a rough.
My question is, the bottom line is, we have all these ponds out there, and the phosphorus builds up in all the bottom of the ponds. And if you disturb it, that's not really good, because that sends it down the Minnesota River to the Mississippi to New Orleans. So my question is, how do you know if a given pond is, quote, polluted? You know, the monitoring is, you can measure the sediment, but if you don't have any idea what the water quality is, how does anybody know what this volume of pollutants are in the water?
There are a couple of different things that that can be done. I don't recall offhand if the city actually takes water samples of ponds. We take water samples of the lakes, and those are reported on an annual basis for Wet'suwet'en Lakes. But the ponds themselves,
Yeah.
I'm not aware of any sampling that, no.
No. That's,
However, part of the municipal operations requirement is to have a pond inventory and clean-out program. So you may, I'm not sure if you're familiar with this, but, so where you dredge out the sediment that is accumulated in the pond, and so those are sampled, the sediment is sampled, and
I understand
Yep.
all that, that the bad stuff is sitting down there. But I'm looking at what is the quality of the water in those ponds. Is it dangerous to put your fingers in them, or kids splash around in them, or dogs come and drink in them, or all that? And I've asked this question now for a long time, and I understand the monitoring, but when I hear the word pollution, which is the big word that we started with, and, you know, we can maybe define something by the amount of water, stormwater goes in it, but, you know, if you don't know what's in the stormwater going in, then it's really hard to tell what the pollution is, you know. And many of the ponds that I'm familiar with are building up, have gone from 14 feet deep to maybe 7 feet in some areas. And that's an awful lot of stuff building up down on the bottom. And if that's a high concentration of phosphorus and whatever else is down in there, you know, how do we know? How can we say that when someone asks a question, do I have polluted water in here? You know, you can say, Len, you can go hire someone to test it, but the program you described includes the ponds and the quality. So my question, you know, how do we deal with that?
I think the question is, what is the, is it something that you'd want to go walk around in or wade out in a stormwater pond? The stormwater pond is really intended to serve the purpose of removing pollutants from the stormwater. So it's a functional system, and certainly it's going to have some pollutants both in the sediment and in the stormwater, but it's intended to remove those pollutants from the stormwater so that the downstream basin can be cleaner. So it certainly has some level of it. It's not going to remove it all, but it does remove the pollutants.
I'm sorry, it sounds to me like tap dancing, with all due respect.
Maybe I'm not understanding.
You know, Commissioner Nachman, I think we've talked about this before, but you know, I completely understand what you're saying in the fact that the stormwater pond, I mean, essentially its job is to collect these pollutants. You know, phosphorus in itself, you know, is not like some other chemicals that you may think of that, you know, if you dip your fingers in it, like you mentioned, would be harmful. But certainly in the eyes of the state and probably most folks, these stormwater ponds are not necessarily meant to be swimmable. You know, so you talk about Crystal Lake or things like that. Really, these stormwater ponds are meant to keep these higher quality bodies of water in good shape where people do recreate and people do use for those types of things. And so it's just, you know, there's 243 ponds that Ron mentioned, and that's not all the ponds in Burnsville. There's many more private ones that the city is not responsible for. And so, you know, on that scale, it's just not practical to, you know, monitor these the same way we do Crystal Lake, and they're not even, you know, they're not held to the same standards, so the data is not meant to be used that way. Before we do take any sediment out, as Ron mentioned, we do test it to find out what's in there and what type of process needs to be done to remove it. You know, but at this point, the MPCA isn't directing us to treat these stormwater ponds really any differently than how we are. And so I understand what you're saying, but I think this is just a fact of really those stormwater ponds are not meant for the type of interaction that other water bodies are.
So that means if you have a smaller pond that isn't the size of one of the big lakes, then no one really cares what's in it?
Well, I wouldn't say that. We're obviously monitoring 20% every year.
No, monitoring in terms of level and erosion, but not anything to do with quality of the water.
Well, the quality of the water we wouldn't necessarily expect to be high. I think that's what I'm trying to get across, is the downstream water bodies of the pond is, the purpose of the pond is to remove the pollutants there so they don't get downstream. And so we would not expect good Secchi disc readings necessarily or low phosphorus levels in stormwater ponds because it's their job to collect those things. Do you understand? You know what I'm saying? So if we took phosphorus samples there and it came back at 200 parts per billion, that might be what's designed to leave that pond. It may be coming in at 400, it's leaving at 200, the pond is removing that 200. So phosphorus levels are high in that pond, but that's really what we want because we don't want it being high downstream.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Commissioner Wolf.
Follow up? I'll address my comments to my fellow commissioner as well. I think I understand one of the things you're saying is that we have to take it largely on faith when they tell us it's removing X amount of phosphorus. These are calculations, engineering calculations that are best estimates. We don't know that that's exactly what's going to happen. But as somebody who's dealt with this, similar situations, one of the problems I know you would encounter if you tried to monitor these is significant fluctuations. You're going to get a heavy rain event, and after that rain event, you're going to get different concentrations of different pollutants than you're going to get after 10 days of dry weather. I think perhaps there are scientific papers, peer-reviewed papers, that I could maybe even find and share with you that would describe the effectiveness of these ponds overall. And then the last thing I would say is that I think you have a valid point about the ponds themselves that has been frankly overlooked by the public to some extent, and that is that I think these can be sinks for wildlife. They're areas where amphibians may go to die, so to speak, because they are heavily enough polluted, and that is a concern. And it's something that maybe we should look at and talk about at a later date.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Commissioner.
Following up on this, I'm just going to address one particular pond, I think, is iTech Pond over there on the east side of Terrace Oaks. Are you familiar with that particular pond? Now, that pond, from all indications, and I think I've addressed this before, was not really a storm pond. It was a natural pond there that the city decided to turn into a storm pond. In its time, the water was extremely clear. There was a dirt path, put a paved path, and many people, to me, believe that it's just a natural pond, and therefore let their dogs go running in there and throwing the ball in there and getting. And so what I'm hearing is that I think there's a couple of different types of ponds we have here. We have ponds that we've actually built, as we've talked about earlier today, and they're going to be storm drainage type ponds. The I-type pond was not. Matter of fact, early residents there indicated that was a spring-fed pond, and the water would turn every year and it'd be extremely clear. Since then, all the sediment has come in there, and it's not nearly as clean as it. So I really think there are some ponds that were natural ponds that the city decided to turn around and make into storm ponds at the time because that's all, it was easier and whatever. Okay. And if the ponds aren't being checked and are really having runoff into them and will go up and down from there, I think, and even though I'm not a big person, I think people need to be aware that these are storm ponds. Because in the case of iTech Pond over there, it has no indication that it's that type of a storm gathering type of pond, and therefore it would seem just proper to let your animal go in there. And we don't really know what's going in there. And then when you talk about events of massive water going into any pond, it's been very common in the past is when they flush out or clean out the water pumps out on
The Roosevelt Parkway.
Burnsville Parkway, they run it right into the pond. Massive water going into it. And so the city is actually created an event just to go into a pond of that sort. And yet there's other ponds before that are really and part of Terrace Oaks on both sides of the road there that I think would be better drainage than to run it right down into that one pond, where it seems to be more. In all estimations of anybody that lived there, it was a natural pond that the farmer had there years before Burnsville Parkway was built. So there's the concerns that I have is that there's certain ponds. It would be nice if we were. My comment is there are certain ponds that I think were natural ponds that we chose to take in a different direction, and it would be nice if we turn around and said, okay, the time is now to take a look at a different, and there may be a two-tier type of pond type scenario, and that's all I'm taking a look at, especially that we've invested in the Terrace Oaks. We're spending $100,000 to put in the oak trees and the grass, and yet we're turning around and still shoving pollutants down into a pond, which in all technicality is part of Terrace Oaks anyways. It's just that a road separates it. End of my statement.
Thank you, Commissioner Dinsley.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Commissioner Wolf.
If I understand correctly, I think some of these are broader concerns that we would like to discuss,
Yes.
probably ongoing and at a future time. I guess I would move to approve or at least accept the review at this time and look for a second.
Second.
Okay, thank you. We have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye to approve the reports.
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Thank you for all your time.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair?
Yes,
This is a follow-up to these discussions that we've had over the years.
When time's out. No, I'm kidding.
I just like to put the issue of the ponds and the water quality of the ponds as some point to be discussed and maybe looked at in a little more detail so we can separate the concept of monitoring, using that word, and defining it more clearly. And in terms of water quality, what should it be?
Are you suggesting a work session maybe in our future to?
When the staff is available.
If I can offer just one more piece of information, because I think the question of different tiers of ponds, there absolutely are different levels of ponds, and Daryl has put together the wetland management plan, and that is one resource which identifies natural wetland basins. It also has a category of natural wetlands which were converted to stormwater ponds. It's the way things were done many years back. We're improving stormwater management, so there are certainly different levels of ponds, and I think this ongoing discussion is good, but that may be a resource that can be pushed out to residents proactively to say, here's where the range of stormwater pond classifications, wetland classifications is, so that they can better understand what their pond might be like.
Just as an aside to that, almost every year an unknown pond that I'm thinking of has major algae blooms. And that's a message that isn't really normal. And some of the algae blooms are more toxic than others, obviously. Not just the duckweed, but the red and the nasty stuff that bubbles up there. What do people do about that?
Yes,
Mr. Chair, if it is not too irregular, I'm wondering if Daryl could come back to the podium and answer, make sure that we understood each other correctly regarding the deer management plan. Because I was thinking as you sat down that the way that I worded myself might have been unclear. I was suggesting that my proposal was that we accept the plan with the date removed. And I'm not sure that I think maybe what I said was, we would like you to go back and remove a day. My motion was to accept the plan if a day was removed. And then I just want to verify that I understood you correctly. You only added one Saturday from what we agreed to last year.
That is correct.
Okay. If the commission all understands that we were approving the plan with that date removed, then I have no further comments or questions.
Yeah, I do believe that was our motion.
That is the way I understood it.
We'll take that one day out and move those dates forward to city council for their approval. The one
That's
Saturday.
right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Next one is recognition of outgoing commissioners. JJ, is this one
Yes,
for you?
that is me. The terms of 4 of our current Parks and Natural Resource Commissioners has come to an end, and these commissioners have not reapplied for another term. Commissioner Dedze has been with us for 4.5 years. Commissioner Domke, just over 2 years now. And then Commissioners Cleveland and Hawkinson have been with us for 1 year each as student representatives. And staff would like to publicly thank them, publicly thank the outgoing commissioners for their service to the community on this commission. And with that, we appreciate you sharing your time and wisdom with the community for the past years. It is greatly appreciated. Thank you very much. And that's a majority of the panel in front of you right now. So it's a big change coming for this commission. Thank you all.
Thank you, JJ.
I believe I have the next item as well, and that is miscellaneous item. As you know, I'm here with you tonight. Terry Schultz, our Parks and Recreation and Natural Resources Director, will no longer serve as liaison to this commission. He will, however, be here when needed or as needed. It just happens he was unavailable tonight, but he will be here for future meetings when it is required. I would also like to share with you that the next Park Natural Resources Commission meeting, scheduled for July 1st, is canceled. It has been canceled in lieu of the commissioner training scheduled for Monday, June 24th. Again, it's at 6:30 p.m. on Monday, June 24th, right here, and that is with the other commissions as well that serve the city. And then so the next regularly scheduled PNRC meeting is set for August 5th. 2013.
So July was canceled, and we're having...
July is canceled in lieu for 1 week earlier, June 24th.
June
24th.
Okay. Same time.
Same time.
Okay. All right. And we come to the last item on our agenda is a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
I will second that motion. All in favor, say aye.
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 Meeting is adjourned. Thank you and good night.